back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We hope everyone had a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday and counted their blessings. Speaking of blessings, we appreciate all the support on the content that we put out. It wouldn't be possible without every sub and viewer who contributes. Before we get started with today's content, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
We had another night of in-season tournament games. We're recording this, the Tuesday, following those games, but you'll
Yeah.
be seeing some on Friday. But we'll start with, I think, the game that kind of exemplified, how awesome these games have been so far, and that's Pacers Hawks. So the Pacers won 157 to
Yeah.
152. So I believe, because I saw it on Bleacher Report, the over under for this game I think was like 250 or something like that, 252,
Mm-hmm.
and they crossed over 300. So I
Yeah.
mean, and it was definitely an offensive minded game that in a way I guess kind of came down to one stop sort of in a way, or one boneheaded blunderous play.
Yeah.
But regardless, we'll start off with Tyrese Halliburton, right? Um, 37 points and 16 assists, 26 in the third quarter. It was a game where the Hawks were really in control in the first half. It was 86, I believe, to 73. So, I mean, it was already a high scoring first half, but one where the Hawks were up by 13, and then the Pacers, ended up going on a crazy run of their own, scoring 46 in the third to Atlanta's 28. Both teams scored 38 in the fourth, but by that point the Pacers had already kind of had a lead, so they were able to pull it out. I mean, a lot of crazy offensive performances in this one. You got a 24-point game from Buddy Hield, 9 of 11, 6 of 6 from 3. Um, and then, I mean, Bruce Brown chipped in 5 of 10, 2 of 5 from 3, 13 points. Obi Toppin with 21 off the bench. Benedict Mathurin with 19 off the bench in 20 minutes. I mean, yeah, this was a crazy offensive performance. I mean, and it was wild because, Atlanta also had a lead pretty late into the game.
Mm-hmm.
Trey Young, this was a game where he, had kind of been in a slump for a while, but he had 38 and 8.
Yeah.
DeJounte Murray had 28 and 5, with 5 turnovers, though. And kind of the bad play of the game, right, where, they were on the fast break. And it was, and they had a chance to kind of, pull away, I guess. And then, unfortunately, he ended up taking, I think, kind of a forced shot.
Yeah. He
Um,
just
you
chucked it
know,
up.
yeah, exactly. And then the Pacers were able to pull it out. So it was, and
Yeah.
then it was 157, 152, but that was partly because Buddy Hield, he scored right at the buzzer where
Yeah.
they lobbed him, where it didn't look like they were gonna go for a shot, but they ended up
Yeah,
doing it.
because
So
Toppin, I think, was on the fast break wide open, and then they were like, "Go up," and then he didn't go up. He pulled it out, and then he threw it to Heald, and then I think he scooped it in.
exactly, but this game is pretty exemplary of why Indiana has been so, impressive this season. Obviously the defense isn't where it needs to be,
Hmm.
but the offense is already really good. I mean, you kind of wonder, what are they going to do as it gets closer to the trade deadline? Because they are 8-5. Obviously the offense is top five, but the
Hmm.
defense is pretty down there. Where it's like I think bottom five or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, it may have changed recently, but the last time I looked, it was pretty low. So I mean, it seems like if they make a move at the deadline, I don't think it would be like a massive one, right? But
Hmm.
probably one to help shore up the defense. Like I know some people, I think there was rumors about, hey, what if they traded for Zach Levine? But I don't think they need a Zach Levine because the offense already is really good. Now you could say he's probably no, not probably, is a better offensive player than some of the other guys they have on the roster.
Sure.
But again, I think they mainly need defense, and if you can do that, you know, it doesn't necessarily put you right in the top tier in the Eastern Conference, but it still continues to make you a more competitive team because, ultimately, like not everybody is going to be able to stay anyways. So, why not, do like something? It doesn't have to be big though, right? Like, because I don't
Yeah.
think some of these other teams, like these young teams, will make massive moves right now just because, again, even though they've been really impressive, they want to see what they got. So,
Yeah. And I think that's a great point because, no matter how like electric this game was offensively, it was horrendous, defensively, in my opinion. I thought, every bucket was like way too easy, unless, that's how good these guys are. But I don't know. To me, it just seems like both of these teams kind of showcase each other's weaknesses, and it's both defense because I think the Hawks have clear potential to be offensively capable of winning, almost every game that they play. The problem is who are they going to stop and, who's going to get those stops, especially in the backcourt. And that's also the same problem I think with the Pacers as well, because like Halliburton's not a great, an insane defender, I would say.
No.
Heald is definitely not, and even if Heald's not starting, I don't think anybody else on this team, for the guards can really defend anybody either. So I'm curious to see, like you said, what they're gonna do to hopefully, offset the defensive struggles that they've clearly been having. Because it's great to put up 157, but it's also horrible to give up 152. So, but it is what it is. But that's wild to only be playing 4 quarters and that's your score. Hey, that's wild.
Yeah, I mean, again, I just look, the Pacers now it may change after this game. Maybe maybe it'll get worse. But yeah,
Right.
they had the fifth worst defensive rating, and the Hawks were the seventh worst defensive
Okay.
rating.
Yeah. Sounds
Both
about
going
right.
into the game. So yeah, that definitely seems about right. And it's odd because with the Hawks, they have like at least a decent handful of guys that I would consider to be like decent or to good defenders. Like I
Yeah.
think, um Jalen Johnson has been pretty good on both ends.
Yeah.
Capella, Okongwu. I mean, like, they have a number of guys. DeJounte Murray right on the perimeter.
Sure.
He's supposed to be a very good defensive
But
guard.
Trey Young is
Um,
really bad though.
yeah,
I
and
guess
that's
that's
the thing,
one thing.
right? And that's the thing is that's kind of the idea, I guess, behind what the Hawks would like to do is you surround Trey Young with a number of other guys who can defend, so that way you can minimize his weaknesses defensively. Because offensively, he's as good as they come in terms of like being able to just like run an
Yeah.
offense and generate it. Because even when he's not efficient, like the Hawks are still pretty good
Yeah.
on
And he
offense
can
because he's a
pass.
really good. Yeah, he can pass. He can set up guys for shots, pretty much anywhere. So they need some work as well. But their situation's a little bit different, I think, than Indiana because the Hawks, like, have been a little bit more consistent in terms
Right.
of like being a playoff team for a while, and they made their big move technically already with Dejounte Murray, but it seemed like even though he's played relatively well for them, it hasn't really translated into great team success.
Right. And that's the thing. Like
So they still need more.
you can have 10 great defenders, but are they going to gel? Who knows?
Yeah, so that's kind of what I'm looking at here. Because again, like on offense, I think the Hawks, again, they're in terms of offensive rating, they're sixth, going into this game. So they're obviously a pretty good offensive team. It's just the
Yeah.
defense, it's got to get better. And again, you can say that about both teams. So I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
obviously. So
Agreed.
like you said, that's kind of why the over under, when I talked about it and mentioned that, that's why it was so high because
Yeah.
everybody knows like these are two very good offensive teams that are also not very good defensive teams.
Yeah.
Um, and going into this game, there were, I believe, it looks like according to StatHead, 8 performances in the regular season where teams had, like where somebody had 157 or more going into, the end of regulation.
Right. That's
The
crazy.
highest was the highest was 165
Okay.
um, in regulation. And that was the Cincinnati Royals, I guess, back in 1970. So
Wow. What the heck? That's kind of crazy to think about.
yeah. And then after that, 163 by Denver in 84, 162 by Golden State in 1990, 161 by the Spurs in 1990. 2019, we had two, Houston and Washington in the same game,
Okay.
159, 158 Houston.
Huh.
And then you had Denver in 1990 with 158, and then the Spurs in 84 with 157, and then now this game. So
Okay. That's intriguing to me. I mean, I didn't get a chance to see this game all the way through, but from the moments that I did see, I was pretty impressed with the offensive capabilities of these guys, and I don't think it like came to me as a surprise at all. Because I know that all these guys can pretty much get a bucket at any time and point. But I think Halliburton is just continuing to showcase that he's just one of these guys. I don't think anybody really expected him to come out of the gate like this.
yeah, I mean, it really is his rise, to the elite tier of point guards that's
Yeah,
really kind of powering this Pacers team. Because he has the ball in his hands a lot. He has great control and feel for the game. Everybody knows this at this point,
yeah,
but just to see it, like night in and night out. Especially for a team where like, going in, you didn't like we thought they had a really good offseason, but it didn't necessarily feel like, that they were going to be, as good as they've been so far. We knew
agreed.
obviously that they were going to be good on offense, but they've been even better, I think, than we would have thought. And
Yeah,
that's, obviously that's been what's powering them to this start so far, right? Because it hasn't really been the defense. Um, but again, shout out to the Pacers because again
yeah,
they've had a really good season. And like I said, I thought they'd be better, for sure. Because like we both thought that they were major winners in the offseason, just in
yeah.
terms of being able to add a bunch of guys and you still have a lot of flexibility with the roster, anyways. Because again, you have a guy like a Buddy Hield who slid into the starting lineup, right? But there were other nights where he wasn't really a major part of their roster at all.
Yeah.
So what does that look like, right? Because that's a
McConnell.
yeah, because that could potentially be a guy you trade, or maybe you keep him because his name came up in trade rumors going into the season, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they said they quieted that down because that's not going to happen right now. It could happen maybe later on in the season, but
Yeah.
we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and then moving on, another Eastern Conference game, 122-119 Cleveland Cavaliers over the Sixers. This was a game, that was pretty back and forth considering, what was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Donovan Mitchell was out, right, which
Mm-hmm.
is pretty significant, right? Because that's the pace, or excuse me, the Cavs.
Look, the
I mean,
Pacers wish.
yeah, I mean, but Darius Garland was kind of able to get it done. And kind of slid into the, next, I guess, next man up spot for him, right? 10 of 25, so not super efficient, but made all the key plays late, right? Getting to the free throw line, right? Setting guys up, right? He had that pass, I think, to Jared Allen, right, where he kind of flipped it in,
Yep.
right around the basket to
Yep.
kind of put him up. Which was kind of key, right? Because Allen, at times was kind of struggling. I know he had 26 and 13, but then there were times like where he had the ball and it just, he kind of lost it, right?
Yeah. You
You
got
almost thought
plucked,
like, oh man, and that was
or he
kind of
hit
the
the deck.
downside. Yeah, exactly. And that was the downside at times, right, of having both of those bigs together, right? But they were able to hold it down without him, without Donovan Mitchell, and that's a pretty impressive win, right? Max Strus stepping in, 20 points, 5 of 10 from three, right? He's played very well for Cleveland. Um, you know, uh, Craig Porter Jr., right? I believe, or Craig Porter, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
a guy that we saw in summer league,
Yeah.
that looked good. And he wasn't really playing, for the Cavs, which at the time made sense just because of what they were trying to do. But
Yeah.
with Mitchell out, he stepped in and he's been like a big part of their team, right? He played 27 minutes tonight.
Mm-hmm.
He's been playing, a lot of minutes every night, and overall, he's played, very well. He's gotten, in my opinion, like more comfortable each game, right? Because I
Yeah.
think early on when he came in, he looked kind of, a little bit lost,
Mm-hmm.
like, he wasn't quite sure what was going on. But he, over time, he's really, come in and he's really made a difference for them.
Yeah, and I think he was on the G League roster prior, and
Yeah.
I think he put up like 20 something points in their game against Denver, if I'm not mistaken. Could be
Right.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I watched this game in its entirety, and I was very impressed with both of these teams, honestly. More so Cleveland, though, because you guys know me. I'm a Garland guy, and this is the kind of Garland that I want to see. It doesn't have to be the most efficient, but I want to see him be aggressive. There's sometimes where it looks like he defers to Donovan Mitchell, and I get that because Donovan Mitchell is so great with the ball. But like I was hearing like all kinds of stats that kind of took me by surprise with Cleveland because when you have a guy like Garland who can distribute the basketball and also score himself, you would think they would be a little bit higher in terms of baskets scored off of assists. But when Donovan Mitchell is out there, like a lot of their baskets are unassisted, so that's interesting. It's an interesting switch up in play style. So I am curious to see, if Garland, continues to be this aggressive when Mitchell comes back or not. But also with Cleveland, I don't know. Something rubbed me the wrong way about some things that they were doing. I didn't like some of the Struce decisions, some of the shots late in the shot clock, some of the defensive
Yeah.
plays. I thought the flagrant foul put them in a tough spot. But, at the end of the day, Philly really put themselves in this hole because I think in the first half they were pretty bad. Second half, they played much better defense and actually got back into the game because most of the game it was a double digit game and they didn't lead until the fourth quarter again because I think their first lead was in the first. So it is interesting to see, what's going on with Philly. But honestly, I think Philly's just missing Kelly Oubre Jr. or Kelly Oubre, excuse me. So that's all I really have to say.
Yeah, it
So
was
yeah,
just a bad offensive night, I think,
yeah,
from Philly. And, again, the Cleveland Bigs, they made it a problem for some of these guys. But yeah, the Craig Porter thing is just wild because again, he's pretty undersized,
yeah.
very athletic, doesn't really shoot at all in terms of threes, right? It's pretty
Mm-mm.
much all, inside the 3-point line. And,
Yeah,
again, it's kind of interesting because, again, usually guys that small normally, it's kind of hard, it's kind of difficult for them to make like a big impact on a game, if they're not able to, to hit jump shots,
yeah,
at least from, mid range or three or whatever. But, he's been able to get it done. So,
yeah. He's been doing a lot, and more so, not even just scoring. He was also distributing the ball as well.
yeah,
And I think that's something that Donovan Mitchell can do as well. So it is kind of interesting to see them bring up a guy like Craig Porter instead of like Amani Bates or even Karis LeVert. I mean, Karis LeVert DNPing in this game was a surprise to me. I'm not sure if he's injured or not, if he's dealing with something, but him not playing in this game is very interesting considering his contract and even the role that he had on the team last year, where sometimes he would be starting.
I think he was hurt.
Okay, got you.
Yeah, but I mean, again, it's kind of interesting just in terms of the guys that they were kind of able to slide in, to help them out, which is interesting. And then like a guy that they signed, pretty late into the offseason, right? Tristan Thompson, right? He's
Hmm.
actually, kind of made a difference for them at times, coming off the bench as their, backup big because they didn't really have one,
Yeah,
last season that they, because in the playoffs against the Knicks, right? It was pretty much Mobley and Allen, and they weren't really playing well together, but at the same time, it was kind of difficult to just play one of them, right? Because then the weaknesses were a lot more exposed. But
right.
Thompson, even though the numbers, the counting stats don't really look too crazy, like it seems like a lot of times when he comes in there, he makes a decent impact, for the minutes he plays. Even though, like I said, it's not a lot. I mean, he closed the game, right? I mean, he
Yeah,
was the guy that they basically trusted to guard, Joel Embiid. Interestingly enough, as opposed to the other bigs. And they kind of forced him into a weird possession, right? Where I didn't really like that play at the end of the fourth for Philly, right, where it was basically just Embiid, just kind of dribbling the clock out,
yeah.
and then kind of settling for a shot.
Hmm.
I kind of would have preferred what they did, towards the end of OT, right, where they kind of like set it up for Maxi, right, where he was, kind of trying to get a drive to the basket and he missed it.
Yeah.
But still,
I would even,
again,
I would even argue that you could go to Tobias Harris, honestly, because there were a couple times where they gave it to Embiid down low, drew the entire team away, and then you just kick it to Tobias Harris, and
yeah.
he hits the three.
I mean, it's not even necessarily that Embiid can't be involved. It was just more so just the fact that, like, the I don't think the play should start with the ball in his
Right.
hands. It should
Agreed.
start with like, yeah, I think it should start with Maxi or someone
Yeah.
else.
I was saying
Um,
Embiid should kick it out to Tobias
right.
Harris in the corner or another shooter or even Maxi, like you were saying.
Right. So yeah, but the thing is, that's not really like his signature thing, right? His thing is more so kind of scoring. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I think in this offense, he's done some really good things, as a passer, right? Because it's led to the scoring be a lot, it's led to the scoring being more balanced, right, than
Hmm.
you would normally see. Right, even though he's still getting his, right? Obviously, we've seen like a lot of the other guys for Philly are playing very well this season. So it's not like it's just a one man show,
Sure.
like it had sometimes been before, right?
Hmm.
Um, but either way, right? 6 assists a game, right? Which is really good for him, right? I'm pretty sure that's a career high.
Yeah.
3.5 turnovers, which is a lot. But
Yeah, he had
he's
six
always
tonight.
yeah, exactly, and he's always been a high turnover guy, anyways. So I guess you know the turnovers haven't really gone up, even though your assists have gone way up. So that's a good sign.
Yeah.
But I still think like at the end of the game, like I just don't think his natural inclination is to like just kind of kick out to a guy,
Yeah.
which
Agree.
again, like if he makes the shot, then you don't really complain. But when it misses, right, then that's kind of hindsight where it's like, oh, there might have been a better option there. But
Yeah.
either way, it's a good win for Cleveland. Tough loss for Philly just because it felt like they should have been able to win this game even without Oubre, just because again Mitchell wasn't there, um, and other guys for Cleveland weren't there as well, right? So like even though Philly was missing some guys, it was Cleveland. So bless you. So it was
Thanks.
just a rough offensive night, and they've been a pretty good offensive team. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure. They are number one in offensive rating. So yeah, they were number one in offensive rating.
Yeah.
So
And I
it's just
think
an off
Tyrese
night.
Maxey and Embiid also are like the highest scoring duo or something like that.
Right? Exactly. So Um, moving on to the next game, right? I guess Suns Blazers, right? These last two games were kind of games where it was like not a whole lot was going on, right? Where it was mainly one sided. I know Portland kind of at times made it a game, but not really, right? I mean, like you never felt like the Suns were going to lose, right? Just in terms of the talent differential on the floor,
Right.
right? Where like the Suns have Durant and Booker, and then the Blazers, who are their two best players right now, on the floor, right? Jeremy Grant, and I guess is it Brogdon? Is it Aiton? I mean, Sharp
I'd
didn't really play very well.
probably say Aiton because I think what Sharp's averaging like almost 20. He's like 17 or something like that.
I
But
mean,
it's
yeah,
shooting like
Sharp,
40% though.
right? Yeah, Sharp had a rough game, and I think I think his hand or something is kind of bothering him.
Okay,
But
got you.
either way, that is kind of interesting with the Aiton counting stats where it was 18 and 8. with a block and a steal.
Hmm.
But a minus 33 in terms of plus minus, which is kind of
Yeah,
interesting. I think part of that was just because they started off the first quarter so horrible,
sure.
right?
Yeah.
That even though they kind of made it a game, right? Like some of that was just it was gonna happen in terms of
Right,
how
right, right.
bad it was. Um, but regardless, now the Suns, I believe they've won four in a row. So that's obviously like a solid sign in terms of kind of getting things back on track
Yeah,
after really falling behind. A little earlier into the season.
yeah,
So again, they have guys playing well, right? Booker, even though he didn't hit a three, still had 28 with 6 assists, right? Then Durant, right, continuing to play great, 31 and 9. 2 of 2 from three, 13 of 21. So again, only seven threes, but again, against a team like Portland, you didn't really need like a crazy performance.
you're
You
right.
just needed to play, well for like, a quarter, and then you were pretty much good.
Yeah, and I mean that just speaks to how horrible Portland's been. And then with the Suns, now they're 8-6, I believe. So I didn't really expect them to be a 500 team, a week ago. Like that was just very jarring to me because
They
they
were
were,
below 500.
yeah, they were below that. So I mean, it's just wild, and it's good to see the turnaround. I think this is something that the Suns desperately needed, especially with Beal being out. But hopefully he can get back and they can continue to win more games. Something that I heard earlier today was Scoot is apparently headed to the G League, I believe, for conditioning.
Okay.
So that's interesting. So they're um, gonna be putting him in the G League for conditioning, and I think it's not necessarily so he's gonna be
Yeah.
suiting up or anything like that or
Just in pre-
playing in the G League, but it's
yeah,
just
just
for conditioning purposes.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen this before with even the star players, like
Mm-hmm.
where like they, before they actually come back into an NBA game, they might do stuff with the G League
Yeah,
guys just to kind of, ease their way in as opposed to kind of like throwing them to the wolves. So it's nothing really out of the ordinary.
exactly.
Um, but it is, it obviously, it's been rough for him because he, didn't play a whole lot before his injury and wasn't playing well before that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very small sample size, but obviously he's been disappointing. But again, it's such a small sample size. It's not time to give up on him yet.
Yeah, he hadn't played since November 1st, so and there's
Yeah,
tons of NBA, basketball left, so
exactly. And again, he's got tons of, he's got years left. I mean, it's not
yeah,
like,
exactly.
yeah, and this is also not a good team. And it's a team that could potentially change by the deadline, because it's possible if some of these other guys, could be gone, maybe like a Brogdon. Williams is probably off the table
Oh
now that
yeah,
he's
he's
not
done.
going to play all the season. You'd just be trading for the contract and for him next year.
Yeah.
So that's probably more of like an off-season move. But
Hmm.
a guy like a Brogdon, I could see him being moved, or
Yeah.
maybe one of the other guys, just randomly gets moved that's on the roster as well.
Yeah.
But either way, we'll see. But and then the last game, right? It was Jazz Lakers, right? Probably even worse, right, than that one, right? Because that game was pretty much over by the end of the first quarter. It was probably over like I think within the first 5 minutes.
Yeah, it
Um,
was rough.
yeah, I mean, again, the Jazz I think have lost what 3, 4 in a row, something like that, right? Because they lost the back to back games in the Sun to the
Yeah.
Suns, right? Where they actually had pretty good offensive performances, but it was not there tonight.
And they
And
can't
again,
win on the road. That's their problem.
right. Yeah, exactly. They're 1-5, I believe, on the road.
Yeah.
Um, and that includes this game. So, it was
Yeah.
pretty rough. I mean, again, you look at the Lakers, right? AD, right, 26 and 16. It was pretty clear, right, that the game plan early on was get the ball to him and score around the rim, right, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, their 3-point shooting, was at 38%. They only made 11 threes. So that's fine. But obviously, the last few games, even though they've won some of those games, the 3-point shooting was really bad. Against the Rockets, they only made like 6 threes, and I think they shot like 27% or something like that,
Jeez.
mostly on open ones, right? And that's a game where like they won by one, and it's like if you shot even just average, right? That's a game that's not even remotely down to the
Hmm.
wire. Um,
Exactly.
but either way, right? Again, LeBron continues to play well, right? Didn't have to do a whole lot scoring wise. They put the ball in his hands a lot more just for the pick and roll, right? They did that with Russell as well, where again, like a lot of it was feed the ball to AD, get a lot of shots around the rim, and that's their bread and butter, right? Again, we saw them play bigger this time as opposed to kind of opting for these smaller lineups. Reddish, right? He got hurt pretty early on with a groin injury, right? So they replaced him with Max Christie, right? And he slid in and did fine. Only 1 of 5 from three, but still had 5 rebounds, 4 assists, right? And depending on the Reddish injury, right, he may have to play more. We'll see. Um, but either way, right, again, the Suns and the Lakers, right, those are two teams that started off kind of slow, but now they've started to find their groove.
Yeah.
Um, which is good because again, like these were teams that we kind of thought would be better to start the season. We were a little bit surprised by how slow they started off.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, things like injuries, especially for like the Suns, obviously didn't help. But at the same time, right, it just didn't necessarily look that great. But now it has looked better, for both these teams. I believe the Lakers, I think, are 10th in defensive rating. And
Okay.
obviously, like, um, something that I hadn't mentioned yet was because it's early in the season, a lot of these ratings could change drastically right over the course of, just a handful of games, right? Like
Yeah.
Dallas,
Yeah.
right, was way up there in terms of defensive rating, and now they've dropped all the way, all the way down to I think 25, right?
Yeah.
Because they've lost a few games, in rough ways as well, right? Where like they're up and then they just can't get stops towards the end of the game. Um, but either way, it's a good sign, for those two teams and the Suns and the Lakers, right? Because again, they started off slow and they've started to pick it up. We'll see if the Warriors can do the same as well, right? They got to win over the Rockets,
Yeah.
the other day as well, right? So, it's these teams are starting to pick it up. And again, they started off slow, but that's why it's a early, that's why it's an 82 game regular season, right? That's the benefit of that is that you have a lot of time to kind of build things up, and fix some things, whatever's broken. Just because, again, you have a lot of games and you have a lot of time. So,
Yeah, and I've loved every adjustment that the Lakers have made. This is definitely a team that has adjusted very well, I think, to, the adversity that they've had to face early on, whether it be moving Austin Reeves to the bench or, changing up what they're going to do. Maybe let's take less threes and, feed AD and actually win games, so, or rest LeBron for a little bit because there's no need for LeBron to play, against Utah or crazy minutes against Utah. Like, I mean, I remember early in the season we were talking about LeBron like playing 35 plus minutes, and we are
yeah,
like, that's not going to be sustainable. He's going to run
yeah,
out of gas. So
yeah,
it's good to see him run, 24 minutes and then
yeah.
also be productive in those minutes.
Well, the commentators, had brought up, how after the first game, right, the initial plan was to play like 29 minutes a game, and
Hmm.
then it was like, is that going to happen? And then like it didn't even last one game, right?
Right.
After that, he's been playing, like you said, 35, 36 or whatever minutes a
Yeah.
game. Um, I don't have much of a problem with like, 33, or something like that. 36 I think is getting
It's
up
pushing
there.
it, bro.
Yeah, that's a lot of minutes. And that was kind of the interesting thing early on is that LeBron and AD have both played very well this season. They've only missed one game apiece.
Hmm.
But prior to the last few games, they were struggling, and it was on both ends of the floor, right? Because we had talked about the defense at times, but even the offense wasn't that great either. Despite the thought process of them having some better offensive players, and some of
Right.
that is just some of those guys just have not played very well, especially
Yeah.
as of late, right? Say like a Torian Prince, right? He was a guy that was brought in to be, a really good 3-point shooter, but I mean, he's been missing threes left and right.
Yeah.
It's getting really rough where it's like, even like the easy stuff like the layups haven't really gone in. And I do kind of wonder if that's like the next adjustment where, Vanderbilt at some point, he'll be on the way back eventually, right? And, I wonder, do you slide him back in? I'm assuming he's going to be back in the starting lineup, and I'm assuming you take Prince out.
Hmm.
But then the question is, is that actually what you do, right? Because you could have Reddish and Vanderbilt together. Now you may suffer in terms of some 3-point shooting, but you would have some pretty solid length and defense.
Right.
Or you just kind of keep Prince in there and just hope he figures it out. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's been pretty rough for him as a shooter.
Yeah. Do you think maybe they put in like Rui or something like that? Because I know
Yeah, I mean,
Rui's a better offensive player than, Vanderbilt, but
yeah,
who knows?
it's it's possible. It just there's gonna be some teams where that might be a problem just because he's
Sure.
better against bigs as opposed to
Hmm.
like like guards.
Yeah.
Like especially like because we saw it in the Warriors series last season, right? Where like he played a lot against Memphis and Denver, but he didn't really play a whole lot against Golden State because he just you can't ask him to go and chase shooters around
Yeah. Yeah.
threes
Yeah.
because
Trust
that's
me, I
just not
know.
yeah, that's just not what he does, right? He's better guarding bigger guys or like just guys that don't necessarily speed around the court. That's
Yeah.
not what he does.
Yep.
So, but either way, this last one, which wasn't the last one, but maybe the most insignificant one, or
Agreed.
maybe not. But the Orlando Magic, right, blowing out the Raptors, right, 126 to 107. The Magic now moved to 9-5. The Raptors now 6-8.
Yeah.
Again, we've continued to talk about the Magic. They've played very well this season, even
Yes.
despite missing some guys, right? Like Markel Fultz is out, no problem. Just put Anthony Black in there, right? Jonathan Isaac playing very well off the bench. Other guys playing as well, right? Cole Anthony, Gary Harris. Suggs came back, right? I think he had missed some games as well.
Hmm.
He played very well. Um, on both ends of the floor, right?
Yeah.
Paolo and Wagner, right? Paolo with 25 and 5, Wagner with 17, 4 and 2. Again, this team continues to show like, why we were very high on them going into the season, right? I don't think we thought that they would be this good, but we definitely thought that they would challenge for at least a play-in, spot, potentially playoffs, right? We thought it
Yeah.
was definitely realistic for them to be able to get there. We just weren't sure, but we did think like of the teams that could be potentially a play-in team, they might have the best chance.
Yeah.
But they may not even need it because I mean, they've so far been killing it. I mean, in
Yeah.
terms of this regular season. I mean, you look at them; they're fifth in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, they might be a legit playoff team all the way through, and that would be very intriguing. I'm not sure if they could win a series. That would be wild. I feel like they might be a little bit too young just to, be able to stomp an opponent or even take a series to game seven. I don't know, but I feel like we kind of have to cross that bridge when we get there with this team because I think there's still a little bit of uncertainty around them because I feel like they're good, but they're also a little bit too inconsistent for me
Yeah,
to, come out and say like, yeah, they're legit, like, because I feel like Paolo's kind of had an underwhelming year, but at the same time, other guys have been stepping up tremendously, like you said, they're Ricky Anthony Black. So, and even guys off the bench like Jonathan Isaac, I think he's done a decent amount on both ends of the floor. So they have all the pieces, I think, to get to the playoffs. The question is, will they win when they get there? And then with
right.
Toronto,
I
it's
mean,
just been disappointing.
yeah, I mean, again, you look at the defense, right? They're number two in defensive rating, and they're basically like right there with Minnesota,
Yeah,
in terms of that defensive rating. But then you look at their offensive rating, right, and they're 27th.
right.
So I
That's
mean,
the tough part.
and that's the tough part, right? Because we know they can get stops, we know they can defend, and obviously by defending they can get out in transition. But
Yeah,
again, at the same time, that's like what you mentioned. They've been kind of inconsistent because they're 9 and 5, but they've also just had these weird games, right, where the offense just isn't there. And the eye test I think matches that as well. Because
yeah,
again, we know like they're not a great offensive team, especially from the three, right? They're not that great. When they have those type of nights where everybody's hitting, because they have some guys that can knock down shots, right? Like
yeah,
Cole Anthony can shoot, Gary Harris can shoot. Wagner can shoot relatively well, right? But then you have other guys, right, where they're kind of, either, inconsistent at best or, just not really good at shooting at worst, right?
right.
Um, like Apollo or, others. And again, in fairness, they've also been shorthanded, right? Wendell Carter Jr. has been out. Suggs, as I mentioned, has been out. Fultz has been out, right? That's basically three starters, right? And
Yeah,
that's kind of important, right? So you could also say the fact that they've been able to win these games while missing key guys, right, is also really impressive as well. But at least for the regular season, I feel like they could probably keep that up in terms of the wins. But like you said, I think in order for them to win a playoff series, I think one of those guys, either Paolo or Wagner, would have to kind of take a leap in the postseason.
yeah.
You know, that's
Especially
a
in
lot.
scoring, because I feel
Yeah,
like the numbers are like efficient enough to the point where it's like I don't have a problem with it. But like, I don't feel like 18 points is like enough.
right.
From like
One of those.
Franz or Paolo, because I think they're
Yeah,
both averaging around 17 to 18 points. I need one of
right.
them in the high 20s
Yeah,
or
exactly.
low
Like you said.
20s. It doesn't matter. 20s.
Exactly. One of those guys, like you said, in the playoffs would have to really step up their game to where they
Right.
get to where it would be like, oh, this guy's like, kind of elevated to like a top 20,
Right.
know, player or something like that, right? If they can get there, that's where they have, a really good potential to win a playoff series.
Exactly.
But if not, right, then that's where it gets kind of tough. Just because in the playoffs, right, then that's kind of where teams can kind of scheme stuff out, and then things can get rough. But
Yeah.
in fairness, again, I would also like to see, what it looks like once all the guys are back. Because again, like we saw a little bit of it early on, right, where they were still winning games, but we haven't seen a whole lot of it just because again they've missed a decent amount of time now.
Yeah.
And then the Raptors. I mean, again, they've been pretty up and down. I mean,
Yeah.
this was a team that I don't think either of us were that high on. I mean,
No.
we liked some of the things they did in the offseason. Like the shooter signing, I think he's played pretty well for them, very
Hmm.
well for them actually. Um, but then again, like you just, then there's other guys who I think haven't played quite as well as you would like, right? Like Siakam, I think has been, a little bit underwhelming, and maybe you could say, well, some of that is just the difference between like a Schroeder versus a Van Fleet, maybe. where maybe there's fewer shots available. But I mean, like both guys are like, guys that like to shoot. It's
Yeah,
just
I don't even think you can really blame it on that. I think he's
yeah,
just having a down year so far.
exactly. Yeah. So yeah, and again, for him that's kind of rough because I think if I'm not mistaken, he's due for a big extension, and obviously he would like to have some better performances to make it more likely. But I just didn't necessarily think that was going to happen because I just think in terms of all NBA, it's really tough to be on there because there's so many other really good forwards. And if any of those guys, have a remotely healthy season, like they're gonna get there before him, right?
Yeah.
Like, like say like a LeBron or Durant, right? If those guys can play 65 plus games, which again may be a tall ask, but if they get there, if they get, then they're gonna get it right
Yeah,
over him.
Tatum.
Like, yeah, Tatum. I mean, who else? Who else do you want to add on there? I mean, like there's a lot of guys. I mean,
Yeah.
Giannis. I mean,
Yeah,
like a Paul George or
right.
somebody. Like there's a lot of options
They
there.
put
So
Kawhi. I mean, like there's a lot.
right, exactly. I mean, and that's the tough part. I mean, and I mean, I guess like, now positions don't matter for the all NBA, but even still, like, regardless, I just don't think he's going to get in there.
Out
So,
of all the guys that we named, I mean, that play virtually his position, I don't think he's better than any of them.
yeah. And again, like I said, that's the tough part
Yeah,
because, now that it's not positional, that's going to make it probably worse, right? Because then that means that, like, you could have an all NBA that has, like, three centers on there.
right.
And then, like, the second all NBA team has, like, two forwards, and then, he's not one of them or something
Yeah.
like, you know what I
And we're
mean? Like, it
excluding the guys that have made the leap. Like we're looking at Anthony Edwards now, Tyrese Halliburton. They've all put their names in the hat, and it's like, I mean, now your percentage is dropping, your chance is dropping to get into that list.
right. So I do kind of wonder, does that potentially increase the chances, that maybe he gets traded, because if it looks like he's not going to get it anyways, right, then maybe he would want to go elsewhere. Because I think, the hesitancy, maybe from his camp, because I think initially, there were reports in the offseason about the idea of him not signing an extension. I
Hmm.
think that probably would have been tied to, well, we're trying to get a super max and we can't get it if we trade it, right? If he's traded, he immediately loses it.
Right.
But now it's like he's not going to get it anyway. So at a certain point, obviously it has to be a mutual thing, right, between him and Toronto, and then
Yeah.
Toronto has to find a suitor that they're cool with. And we know how difficult that can be with the Raptors since they haven't really done
Yeah.
a whole lot of that.
Yeah. They
But
like to dangle their assets. Like, I don't even know. It's so weird.
yeah, so I mean, at a certain point, I do kind of wonder, what they're gonna do, just because again, they've the last couple of seasons, it's definitely felt like they've been a team to watch, but they haven't, other than the Pirtle thing, they haven't really done a whole lot,
Yeah.
in terms of movement in trades, right? And then and they have other guys, right? That I wonder, what are you gonna do? Um, and then like we talk about some of the other performances of underwhelming guys, right? Again, like a Grady Dick, he just hasn't played very well, and
True.
that was a guy
Yeah.
that we thought would be better
Yeah.
for the Raptors. And again, it is a small sample size, but he's not even playing a whole lot. So if he's
Yeah.
not playing a whole lot, that already means, right, that they don't have a whole lot of, belief right now that he's going to really contribute a whole lot. But
Yeah.
I
He's
mean, and
averaging 4 points, 1 rebound, 1 assist on 27% from the field and 33 from the three.
right, yeah. And now again, if they make some crazy moves where they just, have a fire sale, right, then obviously that would open some minutes up. But that doesn't always
23
happen.
from the three, excuse me.
Yeah, but that doesn't always happen because again, even with the Bulls, right? Like, is there a high? What's the probability that all of their guys, that have been in rumors get moved, right? Like,
Right.
don't see it. Like maybe, like I could see one of them, maybe two,
I feel like it's going
but
to be Levine. I just don't think
right,
the others have. Well, probably Caruso too.
yeah,
I've heard the Caruso stuff is heating up.
yeah. I think the Caruso one would probably be the easiest because his
Sure.
contract would be the easiest to move, and I feel like he'd probably be the easiest to fit in just because he's not a star.
Right.
He could just probably play with a lot of teams. But a guy like Levine, again, his contract is so big, um, that only a handful of teams would probably be willing to do it because then you'd have to give up a lot. And then, like, is your team set up to, give up a lot, for him when he's not necessarily in the tier of guys where, like, he automatically is, a huge difference
Right.
maker, right? Where, like, he could help teams, but there's going to be some teams where he won't help enough. You know what I mean? And,
Yeah.
like,
There's some teams he just can't make. I don't think he makes a lot of teams in the NBA a contender. Simple as that.
right. Exactly. Yeah. So, and then with Siakam, I feel like he's in a higher tier, I think, than Levine. Just because I think we've seen him more, in better situations.
He's
Now,
a
again, I guess
champion too.
yeah, and again, I guess you could say he's had better players around him. But either way, I also think he's just a better player. So I mean,
Agreed.
um,
I
but
agree with that.
yeah, so I think his situation, along with some of these other Raptors, will be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
Obviously Anunoby's been in a lot of rumors. But again, he hasn't been traded yet, so we'll see.
Feels like that's
It's
been a
just
thing for like a year and a half now. But
it's just I don't understand what the direction is with the Raptors because I
sure.
see that there's a number of young guys like a Scotty Barnes where it's like, yeah, we should build around that guy, or at the very least he should be a building block.
Hmm.
But then it's like but then you look at some of the other guys and it's like hey, these guys are solid players, but some of these guys should probably just be elsewhere.
Yeah,
You know
and
what I mean?
like they clearly don't work with Scotty Barnes. I think that's
Yeah.
the key thing too. Like the roster construction is so odd, and like you said, the sense of direction. You don't know where this team is headed, really.
Right. Like it was a game where they shot 50% from 3 and still got blown out and like this is not a team that's really a good three-point shooting team.
Right.
And you can tell, right? Just look at the personnel, right? Like Schroeder, he shot well from 3, right? But historically he's not a great three-point shooter. Barnes I think has shot relatively well from 3. Anunoby, right? But then like, Siakam, I mean, it seems like his shooting is kind of down. I mean, like they just don't have like a lot of great outside shooting. They have some guys that can hit threes, I guess, but
Yeah.
they're also very streaky where it's like, again, we've seen seasons where Siakam has shot well, and then other seasons where he hasn't shot well. Same with a
Right.
lot of other guys on the roster. So, I mean, yeah, I just feel like this is a team where it's like, something's got to change because I just
Yeah.
feel like what it is right now just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Because what's the point of being, like where they're at right now, and when there's other when you could probably get a decent return for at least some of these guys. Like you could get something for Siakam. I feel like
Oh
there's a
yeah,
lot.
you could probably get like at minimum a first round and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah, like
And
I
even
mean, again,
pieces, players.
yeah, I think like he's a guy that should be a difference maker for a number of teams. Again, like is he like the guy that you would want, to be like a one or two option? No.
No.
If he's like your third best player or something like that, I feel like he'd be in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, that's pretty much it for the in-season tournament games. Again, we had other games, as well. We don't necessarily need to get into all of them, right? We had some, some intriguing, or I guess funny games, right? Say with the Pistons, and the Nuggets, right? Where Denver, right? Or excuse me, Michael Malone,
Yeah.
and Jokic, right? Both got tossed in the game, and they still ended up winning, right? Even without Jamal Murray. I mean, Detroit's missing guys as well, and they're
Hmm.
also just a bad team, but
Right.
just something that was kind of funny. Um, Another situation, right? The Hornets, right, getting a win over the Celtics.
Big deal.
Uh, right, yeah, a game where they were down by I believe 18 points or so. And they came all the way back, right? LaMelo Ball tied it up. They went into OT. Miles Bridges, right, ends up hitting the dagger game-winning three, basically for them. Um, and LaMelo Ball, right? He was a guy, that when we were talking about our surprises, right? I talked about like, hey, this guy isn't playing very well.
Hmm.
What's going on here, right? Because again, he's in his, what fourth season or whatever at this
Yeah.
point. And he just, he was playing really bad. But the last several games he's played great. It hasn't necessarily led to a ton of wins, but at the same time, right, he hasn't really been the problem, um, for them.
Yeah.
But it is kind of
Individually, he's
interesting.
been on a tear.
Yeah, and it is kind of interesting, right? Because you look at the plus minuses, right? His plus minus was +3, right? And he was kind of a guy that helped. But then you look at some of the other guys, right? Mark Williams +33 in a game that they won by 3. Um, you know,
He just provides a
Brandon,
little bit
right?
more
Hitting
though,
his
I
20.
feel like, than LaMelo, like in terms of like impacting the entire
Yeah,
game. Because I feel like LaMelo, yeah, we know that he can get like assists and stuff, and we know he can score, but he's also not a
right,
good defender in my opinion. So
exactly.
that's what it
Yeah, it's
probably factors
yeah, it
into.
was the defense and rebounding. And it was just also, again, a bad, close to the game by the Celtics, right?
Sure.
Kind of a game that was a little bit more reminiscent of last year, right? Tatum had 45, 13 and 6. So you had a great game from him. Most of that was in the first half, but still ended up finishing with 45,
Yeah.
right? Jalen Brown, right? That's the guy where he was 5 of 17, 13 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. He's been pretty up and down. And again, we've talked about it early on in the season where it seems like, he's at times, I think probably just struggling a little bit to adjust to his role.
Hmm.
Obviously now he's on like a huge, massive contract or whatever. And like the counting stats don't necessarily look bad. It's just it feels like, because he's averaging 21 and 5 with 3 assists, right? The shooting is down. The efficiency's down a little, somewhat, right down to 45. Um, 34 from 3, right? Some interesting splits, right? At home he plays very well, right? On the road, not so much, right? Because
Hmm.
at home, 50 from the field, 38 from 3, 24 a game, right? Obviously, on the road. So, obviously that's a big difference. So I don't know. I mean, again, their record is still really good. I mean, this was one of only a handful of losses, right? I mean, they've only lost 3 games. And again, teams have games like this all the time, over the course of a season, right? Where you just end up having a bad loss, right? In a game that you should have won.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessarily a big deal, but it is something to kind of think about just because, again, you need a really good version of Jalen Brown in the playoffs, right? Where you can't have a version of him where he's kind of just up and down. You need
Right.
him to be consistent, especially because again, now you're paying him a lot of money. Um, and this is a team that's trying to win a championship, right? This isn't like 5 seasons ago where they're just kind of trying to be a playoff team. Now they're trying to win.
Yeah.
So hopefully you can get that sorted out. But either way, like I said, it hasn't hurt them too much because they're still winning. I mean,
Yeah,
they've
they're
had
still
some
11
weird,
and 3.
yeah, and I mean they've had some weird moments where they kind of had to come back and win it, right? Like that Grizzlies game, right, where they were down, probably shouldn't have wanted, and they ended up winning
Mhm.
anyways. And again, they're 11 and 3, so it's not a whole lot to complain about, but just kind of something to think about.
Yeah, for sure. I think they're in a comfortable spot, but still you don't want to get too comfortable, especially with the way other teams in the East have been playing, specifically Philly.
Exactly. And then just again to hit on, a couple other teams, before we get to the news and rumors, right? The Pelicans, right, blowing out the Kings, 129-93, right? The Pelicans, now it feels like they're starting to get a little bit of mojo back. Zion with a great game, right? Ingram with a really good game.
Mhm.
And again, it's starting to feel like once these other guys come back, they should be better. Because again, it was a team where I was kind of wondering what was going on, even though I did understand that multiple guys were out, but they've been a lot better, I think, the last few games. Um, and I think it's starting to kind of show. Zion is starting to play better now, and I think that's the other thing, right? Where
Yeah.
again, the counting stats look relatively similar, but then you looked at the efficiency and it was way down. But in a game like this, right, 12 of 16 from the field, he shot 60% last season, right? And
Yeah.
now those numbers are getting back up. And again, if you can get the quote unquote best version of Zion, whatever that is, right? Again, that's another way to elevate your team in addition to other guys coming back. Because once the other guys come back, this team does have a lot of depth.
Yeah, they're heating up for sure. And like you said, big factor is Zion playing at a great level, and then also Ingram stepping up as well and actually hitting all of his shots. You went 5 for 5 from three. Like you said, once they get extremely healthy, get Alvarado back, get the other guys back. I mean, I think they'll be um first. I'm not going to say a lock for the playoffs just because we know that there's probably going to be some other injuries down the line. But I think fully healthy, I think they're a lock.
Yeah, and again, like it hasn't really been. I mean, Zion's missed a few games due to rest.
Yeah,
I think Ingram missed a few. Due to I think it was like a knee or a shoulder or something like that. But outside of that, again, they've played, most of the season. I mean,
yeah,
again, the season has been relatively short, so far. Most teams are, about like what, 15-ish games or so, right?
yeah,
He's played 11 games, right? They're 7-7, so he's only missed 3, right? So, you'll take that, obviously that's a big step up, from where it had been, right? Because before that, right, we talked about it, right? On average, he was playing like 20 something games a season, which is, including a season where he didn't play at all. But, if he can continue to keep it up, that's pretty good. Like I said, both guys have played 11 games so far, so you like to see that. Um, and, despite missing a number of guys, they're 500, but I think it will get better.
yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it's been kind of wild in terms of what's been going on over the course of the season. Just a lot of teams I think playing well. We're still kind of trying to figure out, who's ultimately gonna, break away. But I still feel like so far we've still seen like, Boston being, at the top of the East. Denver, has even, after that win, before that win, right, they were starting to kind of slip. But again, they are without Jamal Murray.
Hmm.
I still feel like, at the end of the day, they're probably still the best team in the West. And then after that, you do kind of wonder, right? Because I talked about, Minnesota and they've been playing very well, as of late. They just had a big win over the Knicks, right? Towns is also playing great as well. And that was another factor, right? Where he missed a lot of time last season and now he's healthy. He's playing very well. Um, but at the same time, right, I'm still not necessarily ready to say like Minnesota is the second best team, in the Western Conference. I think
Yeah,
they played very well. But again, I think after the Nuggets, I think kind of what we've seen is that a lot of these other teams, they have something to prove, right? Like they haven't necessarily earned the benefit of the doubt just yet, right? Even teams like we talked about, that we thought, were kind of going to be the main contenders, right? Like the Suns, the Lakers, the Warriors, right? They, kind of have something to prove, in terms of like they got to show us, what they're going to be capable of.
Right.
But I still feel like right now it's the Nuggets. Oklahoma City's played great as well, but again, I still would put them in the crop of I got to see what they do come playoff time because they haven't been there yet, right? They've only been in the play-in and they did not play very well. But now, they've got another guy in Chet who's played great. They have a lot of young talent, so we'll see what a lot of these teams can do, right? Dallas, it feels like is starting to slip. The last few games. The Kings are starting to catch fire again. Obviously, they had a horrible loss against the Pelicans. Although in fairness, we did say the Lakers and Suns are starting to catch up now
Hmm.
because now they've gone on. Now both of those teams have gone on a run. We'll see if the Warriors can do the same. After they got a win over the Rockets. So those teams I feel like will still be in the fold. It's
Yeah.
just for now, I don't think any of those teams have separated themselves yet. From Denver in the West. Even though again, there's a lot of teams that have played very good. The West outside of a handful of teams, has been crazy. Obviously, even a team like the Clippers, whose record is bad, they've won a couple games, and we'll see what they can do. But then after that, right, the bottom four teams, right, that's probably how it's going to stay,
Yeah.
right?
They're
Like, I
done.
don't see the Jazz, the Grizzlies, the Spurs, or the Blazers. Maybe the Grizzlies might be able to when Ja comes back, but they're so far behind that it's going to be really difficult.
Yeah. I
Um,
think they're
they're
done though.
yeah, like they're 3-10. So I
Yeah.
mean, and again, like the Lakers started off 2-10 and then ended up closing the season pretty well. But
But that's so different. They made so many moves.
right. I mean, with the Grizzlies, I mean, again, they are without their best players, so we'll see what they can do when Ja comes back. I
Yeah.
feel like they should be better. Like they have a chance, I think, maybe to get there. But again, there's already 10 teams, and you could say 11, with the Clippers, right? That have a chance to be in that final mix in terms of the plan, and that means the Grizzlies, if they're going to get in there, some one of those teams has to come out, and which team is it? I mean, that's the problem,
Yeah.
because again, that's 12 teams. So that means two of those teams aren't even going to be in the play-in. And right now I don't feel like I'm quite ready to say like, oh, this team has no shot of even being in the play-in. Because even
I
like the
it might be
Clippers,
Houston. It might be Houston. They might get like knocked down and then the Clippers may like surge up. I don't
right,
know. That's probably the most
maybe,
realistic thing. Or it could be
yeah,
the Pelicans. Not sure.
yeah. Because the thing with the Rockets is that they started off 0-3, and everybody was talking about how bad they were. Then they won six in a row. Now they've lost three consecutive games.
Yeah.
Relatively decent teams, right? They lost to the Lakers, they lost to the Warriors, they lost. Excuse me, they lost to the Clippers, right? Who don't have a good record, but I feel like they're a little bit better than their record, even though I'm still not quite sold on them yet. But
Yeah.
that's the tough part because again, like I said, one of those, two of those teams is not even going to be in the play-in, and then there's going to be three other teams, or I guess two other teams that won't even make the playoffs.
Right.
After they get eliminated from the play-in. So that's the wild spot because again, we have at least 11 teams that have a chance of getting in. But again, you mentioned that the Pelicans and the Rockets, could just completely, kind of just crater maybe. But then it's like, in terms of the play-in, which one do you think, would fall out of that?
Mm. Probably Houston. I think they're probably the most prone just because of the amount of inconsistencies on this team. I think, with Jalen Green kind
Yeah,
of coming back down to earth a little bit and just,
right.
going back to his base form, the one
Yeah,
that we're kind of all used to. But I don't know because I feel like they do have a coaching advantage in some aspects in the West, but the
yeah,
personnel advantage with the young guys like Jabari Smith, Jalen Green, I'm not too sure on. I feel like the Clippers probably talent wise could outbeat them, and they should have a better record than them in theory.
yeah.
And I think I
But
I
they
hope
don't.
the Pelicans, ideally, I think the Pelicans will probably stay in there.
Yeah,
So I
if they
think
can keep
Houston would
healthy,
fall out. Houston's probably the
if
most
they're
prone to fall.
yeah, if their stars are healthy, they have a better shot, I think, probably than the Rockets, just
Yeah,
because I think they have more overall talent.
right.
Um, again, but the Rockets will be something to watch because again, they've been, again, they started off losing three in a row, then winning six in a row, and then
Hmm.
losing three in a row. So now they're 500. And that could be the team that potentially kind of tails off because, like you said, they just have a lot more inconsistencies to kind of iron out. Because even beyond, like you said, Jalen Green, even like a Jabari Smith, he's had solid games, but he's
Sure.
also had some bad games, and then other guys, as well. Even like some of the vets, like say like a Fred Van Vliet, right, where there's games where he's been pretty solid, and then other games where he's shot, absolutely horrible, right? I think he's
Yeah.
still shooting basically around the same as he usually does. Um, even though
38%
the
from the
assists are
field, I
way up.
think.
Yeah, even though the assists are way up, which again, part of that's because he's got the ball more now. But he's still shooting like 38 from the field, 36 from three. Which is, not amazing. But I mean, either
Sengun's been
way,
on a tear, though. We will say that.
yeah. and that's the other part is that, it seems like he's kind of so far been their best player this season. Um,
No surprise.
yeah, because again, he's got a lot of talent, especially on the offensive end. 59 from the field, 35 from three, not a whole lot of 3-point attempts, right? I mean, he's averaging two a game, which is up from what it was before. And again, you'll take the 35%, right? Because, before that, he wasn't really shooting that great. The free throws, I think, needs to get better because, he's had some games where, he's just been bad from the free throw line. And especially because the first two seasons, he was, at 71, and
Yeah,
now he's down to 60. Um, so that's, and again, this early in the season, that can change, right?
yeah.
Because again, it's not like he gets to the line a ton. Four times a game, I guess. Um, but again, I still really like his game. I think he's very good. It's
His
just again,
numbers are similar to Jokic's in his third season, FYI.
yeah, and again, like, the defense is still not necessarily great, but part of why their defense is really good is because they still have some other guys that can defend, and they do switch everything. So that's kind of how you can kind of mitigate,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. But still, that feels like the team where I'm not quite sure where they end up finishing because it does feel like they are a legitimate team. I just don't necessarily know if they're, like you said, they're going to be consistent enough to
Yeah,
be able to, to finish the deal in terms of like, getting into that final 10 spot. You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
they could. It just depends because again, they're
It wouldn't surprise me if the Clippers just catch up like lightning quick
right.
or overtime. Either way, I feel like the Clippers are probably more prone to make the playoffs and the play in than the Houston Rockets.
Yeah. I mean, again, we'll see because if you get a better performance, I think from some of those other guys, more consistent, then that's where it'll
Yeah,
go up. Again,
sure.
they are young, so you got to expect some inconsistencies,
Exactly.
anyways. Even though, again, like a couple, like say like a Jalen Green, he's in what, year three, so I feel like he's the guy, that you know, it feels like it just seems like the fit may just be kind of awkward. Just because, again, like he's a guy that does like to score with the ball in his hands, and but he's still not efficient at it, and that's the problem. And that's probably what's going to hurt Houston,
Yeah.
at the games because they don't really have like a consistent go-to offensive guy other than Shengun, and I think they need at least one of those guys to be either a guard or a wing. And I think Brooks, his shooting has been good, but he's still not a guy that like you're gonna just go to at the end of games and play through.
Yeah, he
I
can't be
think
your
one
number
of
two option. Heck no.
yeah, I just think one of those guards is going to have to pick it up in terms of the efficiency, and it's probably not going to be Van Vliet just because
Nope.
this is kind of what he does. It's going to have to be Green, but again, he's not really been a model of consistency either. So that's where I think it's probably going to hurt them. Is mainly just like again, you just don't have a great offensive guard. I like the passing and playmaking and defense from Van Vliet. It's just the offense at times can be kind of rough.
Yeah, and they're a
Because
fun team to watch. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not hating on
yeah,
them, but
exactly, yeah.
geez, man.
Right, because like against the Warriors, right, there was like one play I think where he hit, like a pretty difficult three, that was kind of deep, and then the next play he just like pulls up, from deep, didn't
Right.
even really look like he even really like took it time to really like
Yeah, it's
shoot.
nonchalant. I get you.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean that's the rough part, but either way, like you said, it is a fun team. It does feel like a legitimately solid team,
Yeah,
and so I think a lot of people still deserve credit for that.
exactly.
All right, so pretty much to close out with news rumors, not a whole lot, just a couple of things, right? So the Kings, according to Shams Charania, they've been interested in some trade targets, right? Pascal Siakam, Zach Levine, OG Anunoby. Um, so again, I think I kind of remember at times, like rumors about, maybe like a Siakam to the Kings. I don't know if I don't really remember OG or Levine. Those were kind of ones that caught me by surprise a little bit, but I think Siakam, I feel like makes some sense. Because the Kings are a pretty good 3-point shooting team, so I feel like you can kind of mitigate it. Although, in fairness, then you have like Fox and Sabonis, and then Siakam, and
Mhm.
then that's kind of a weird combo.
Mhm.
Uh, because again, none of those guys are great 3-point shooters, unless again, if Fox picks up his 3-point shooting, that could make a difference. But
Right.
still, defensively, that would obviously be an upgrade. Um, and you'd have another solid ball mover passer as well who can, also play with the ball in his hand. So you could be a little bit more dynamic offensively, which I feel like is probably what they need in addition to the defense.
Yeah.
Um, Levine, obviously he can score, but I feel like that's probably the one that they don't really need quite as much of because they can already score. Now you could say he does it in different ways than some of the guys they have.
Mhm.
So again, like Siakam, it could be a more, diverse or dynamic offense. But then it's like, he's probably not going to help you defensively. And again, that's the bigger issue for the Kings, I think, than the offense. Is just the defense is bad. Um,
Yeah.
so that's the main thing. And then Ananobi, again, that's fine, 3 and D. that kind of fits the prototype of the type of player that they need. Then again, you could have him either at the 2 or the 3. And then, you could have Keegan Murray, and then whatever else, and that could kind of mitigate whatever from Sabonis if you have strong wings. But I don't know. Like I said, the Siakam one obviously is the best player. I feel like the Ananobi one is probably the easiest to fit.
Yeah.
But I mean, where are you at with that in terms of those three guys? Like,
I
which
mean,
guy ultimately do you think you would probably prefer the most?
I would probably prefer OG just because he's, an elite two-way player. He
Right.
can spot up and hit the three. But, the interesting thing is, I think, I feel like OG is probably a little bit more of an efficient Kevin Herter. I feel like they could probably get rid of Kevin Herter because they have Malik Monk. And I think they're relatively similar as well. I think obviously Malik Monk is extremely athletic, way more athletic than Kevin Herter. But,
He can
the skill
pick
sets are very similar.
pick and
Um,
roll as
Yeah, so it's like I feel like if one was traded, I feel like the loss wouldn't be, too crazy. And they do have some stuff that they can give up as well. They do have a decent amount of first round picks. I think they still have one, I think, to give to Atlanta, but outside of that, I think they've got about three. And they're so young, like it doesn't really matter. I think, depending on what they give up, because I think they can afford to give up some first round picks if they're really chasing a star. Because I heard that they're literally chasing like every star that's going to be
yeah.
on the market. So they might wait
Well,
until the deadline to do this.
yeah,
And OG's
and
not really a star at this point. So maybe they don't go with OG. Maybe they really do buy in on Zach Levine. But I don't really like that because I feel like they should have learned their lesson because they had Halliburton and De'Aaron Fox and that didn't really work out. And I feel like De'Aaron Fox is the guy that you have to build around. And I don't think Levine and De'Aaron Fox would be a good fit. So it would probably have to be OG Ananobi or Siakam.
yeah. Offensively, it would probably work. I just think the issue is the defense, and
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
the big. And I think that's the bigger thing that Sacramento needs to fix. So I feel like the OG one, either OG or Siakam, I wouldn't really have an issue with that. The issue with Siakam is you probably would have to give up more
Yeah.
because he makes more and he's a better player.
What if
So
they go
then
for
it's like,
somebody like Caruso too? That would be interesting.
yeah, and that's the thing. Like with Siakam, is that that kind of crosses the threshold of okay, so that might mean you might have to give up a guy like a Keegan Murray, or somebody like that.
Really? You think
Uh,
they would do that? Because I think he has what, 3 years left on the rookie deal though. You
I'm
think they would
I'm
really
not
do
saying
that?
that I'm not saying that they should or that they would. I'm just saying like I think because Siakam like is held I think in high regard, that might be a scenario where like contract wise and assets wise, that might be a scenario where it's like you may have to give up a
I
guy
wouldn't
like
do that.
yeah, I'm not saying that you should.
Yeah, yeah, I
I'm
get you.
just saying like, you may take like a hard look at it. Like just because
Yeah.
again, with Sacramento, we know what they're trying to do in terms of being a competitive
Mm-hmm.
roster. And Siakam is already very good, in terms of I think he's the best of all the guys we mentioned.
Right.
But I also think OG is probably the best fit and at the very least probably the one that you have to give up the least to get unless Toronto does something really strange. So,
Yeah. I
but,
agree
but
with all
either
that.
way, yeah, I wouldn't be mad at either one. I think either OG or Siakam I wouldn't have too much of a problem with, but I think the Levine one I just don't think would make as much
Yeah.
sense because I don't
Just
think
need to
he's
stay away from that.
yeah. So and then again, I think he's got the biggest contract if I'm not mistaken. So I mean that's the other factor as well because like again, it's not even just that you have to give up stuff; it's that you have to also match the contracts and. Again, like I don't think the Bulls are going to be like, yeah, we'll take like Kevin Herter and a bunch of random stuff and picks for Levine. They probably would like a little more. And it's like I just don't think he's that level of a difference
Because
maker to
I
where it
feel like
would be worth.
I feel like the Bulls would probably want somebody like maybe like Harrison Barnes, Malik Monk, Davion Mitchell, and
Yeah,
like a first round pick or something like that. And
right.
that's a big haul for one guy who
Yeah, I
doesn't
mean,
really. I don't know. That's just me though.
yeah, like I mean, ideally, you'd like. I mean, I'm sure for the Bulls, they'd like like young player draft pick,
Hmm.
maybe expiring contracts or
Hmm.
whatever. But then it's like also like with the Bulls, what is their goal, right? Because it's like they haven't really seemed like a team that's like, oh, we want to tank, we want to be horrible so we can be
Right.
ready for the draft, right?
Right.
Because that's how they got into the situation of putting all those guys together with Lonzo, DeRozan, Levine. They did all that. It seemed like it worked at the time, and now it hasn't. So I don't even know if they really would want to just be like in a scenario where it's like, let's just sell on these guys, just get back like draft picks and expiring contracts. Like, but I feel like the asking price is going to have to come down because I don't see that. I just don't really. I would be very surprised if a team gave up like a lot in terms of actual assets to get Levine. I feel like that's a
There's no
scenario where if I'm
shot they
a team,
do.
yeah, I just feel like if I'm a team, I would buy low on them.
Yeah, especially after the Dejounte Murray thing last year. So
Yeah, and then lastly, kind of a weird story, I guess, from the Knicks, in terms of James Dolan resigning from, a bunch of board positions. I think this dates back to, a lawsuit with the Raptors, right, that had been going on for a while. Just because it seemed like, they have accused like, the Raptors, head of video and as well as an assistant player development coach, um, using a guy that like used to work with the Knicks to kind of like steal stuff. So we'll see. But now Dolan, he, apparently left some of the boards. We'll see what happens. I don't know. It's kind of a thing where I'm not really sure, like, who I'm gonna believe, but I don't know. It's just kind of a wild situation where one of the, more recognizable, owners in the league, is just kind of just left all these positions. But he's also kind of been a demonstrative guy. So
yeah, I've heard some very bad things and some very good things. So it seems like he's a little bit more on the infamous side. You can stand where you want to stand with him. I don't really care. But yeah, it's just a weird situation. It seems like some drama. But the whenever somebody resigns, that tells you it's legit. And it's not always the best situation. So I think that's something to keep your eye on, I guess. But I don't think he's probably going to resign from like his position as owner, or he's going to sell the team or anything like that.
no, he's
Um,
yeah, I think he's just kind of saying like, oh, like the NBA is not, helping me out or like doing their job or
yeah,
like want to hear anything from you, so I'm just gonna, do whatever.
I
I
know
don't
he's
know.
been really critical, like of the entire league, and especially the commissioner. On like a number of things. Like I think it was like revenue sharing stuff. Like it's just like a whole big hodgepodge of drama, and I don't know. It could be like legit in terms of like he doesn't feel that he's being treated equally, but at the same time, it could just be some stirred up manufactured stuff for clicks.
Yeah. Yeah, and then last but not least, just another thing, LeBron, he scored, his 39,000 career points tonight against, the Jazz. Just again, that's a lot of points. I mean,
First
again,
ever.
no other player has done that. Again, we've already talked about it before in terms of what he's continuing to be able to do. At this age, they kind of flashed a graphic in the game where they showed like other players in their year 21 season or whatever, and like none of those guys were averaging like more than like 7 a game.
Right.
They weren't even really playing major minutes because they were all, either like role players or like end of the bench guys. So,
Yeah.
just kind of wild that, he's still able to do that, and still be, like a, top of the line guy.
Yeah, and he's elite, and I've seen people try and like take take away, what he's been doing with the argument of, well, he came in when he was 18, he came in straight out of high school, whatever the case may be. I mean, there's been a lot of players that have come in straight out of high school and they're nowhere near, this amount of points. So I feel like you do have to take his skill and his greatness into consideration when you're talking about how many points he scored. I mean, this is the first time we've ever seen this, so we're just witnessing history.
I mean, yeah, shout out to that because again,
Yeah,
it's something that we may never see again. I mean, so
exactly. This could be one of those records that's unbroken, or maybe it's broken in about 50 years, but who knows?
yeah, it's like everybody, including guys such as like, say like a Kevin O'Connor or others, who have echoed it, right? Don't take these guys for granted, right? Like, these
Exactly.
older stars, because we've kind of talked about it. Where like, despite the fact that at least early on, right, their teams weren't necessarily looking all that great. Those guys individually were playing
Yeah.
really
Like
great
Kevin Durant
basketball.
is playing,
Yeah,
almost as good at, if not better than his MVP season. So
right,
it's just something to watch, and I'm very curious to see what their final stats are going to be.
right,
Albeit hopefully they stay healthy and whatnot.
right,
But the fact that they played this many games and they're playing at such an elite level, and they're the top guys in the NBA is ridiculous at their age, in
right.
my opinion.
Yeah, and again, again, a guy like a Steph, right? Where
Yeah,
again, he's
he's
35
included.
or whatever. Yeah, and he's still doing what he's been able
Yeah,
to do. So I mean, again, these guys are playing great. And
yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see, what happens come playoff time, right? Where, like last season, right? A lot of the top teams standings wise, right, were like those younger, teams that were kind of over the course of an 82 game season when a lot went out. But then once it was playoff time, right, we saw more of those kind of like veteran savvy teams, end up making it out,
right,
right?
right.
the Warriors over the Kings, right? Like the Lakers over the Grizzlies,
Yeah.
Heat. I mean, like the Heat Bucks thing is different, but more so like Heat against Celtics, right?
Right.
Like stuff like that. So,
Right.
we'll see if it happens again this year, but there's a lot of great basketball going on around the league.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, we hope and wish that you had a great Thanksgiving, safe Thanksgiving, whatever. Again, we also appreciate, the fact that everybody, continues to, like the videos, view these videos, and subscribe as well. So continue to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for listening. We hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.